Hello, good evening, and Happy New Year. Today we're going to discuss about clustering. So we will continue our presentation before the Christmas holidays, and we will discuss about DBScan, clustering by unmasking, and hierarchical clustering. I had a short delay, a small delay because of the extended discussion with the previous from the previous lecture. There were a lot of questions about the projects. So at the end of the presentation today, we're also going to discuss a bit about the administrative issues. Most of you probably got this information, but I am also going to repeat it during at the end. Okay, so just a quick reminder. So we're going to present some unsupervised learning approaches. So in unsupervised learning, we have a data set without labels. So the goal is to discover some structure in the data. So essentially, we want in clustering, we want to find groups of examples that are meaningful, that are representative, and in dimensionality reduction, we want to project the data in a lower dimensional space, in where we can make some interpretation of the data points, perhaps find some interesting groups and so on. Okay, so in the first category, we discussed last time about k-means and variations of k-means, such as kernel k-means, soft k-means, and so on. So these bunch of approaches are related to clustering, and we also discussed some problems of k-means and failure cases with some specific data organizations, and in this lecture we will discuss about DBScan. So this should be capital letters. So we will discuss about DBScan and hierarchical clustering. And hierarchical clustering generates a hierarchy of groups. And here there are two types of approaches: agglomerative approaches and divisive approaches. And we will see some algorithms from the first category here. And next time we will discuss about dimensionality reduction, and we will present principal component analysis and TSNE. So let's start with DBScan. So DBScan is short for density-based spatial clustering of applications with noise. So as the name intends, it seems to be, it is an algorithm that is robust to data that contains noise. And it is based on clustering points into groups that are closely packed together. So again, as the name implies, is a density-based algorithm. So it really looks at the density of the data to form these clusters. So the algorithm was introduced in a paper in 1996. Different from k-means, it has the advantage that it doesn't require the number of clusters to be known in advance. So we do not specify the number of clusters. It comes out automatically after applying the approach. However, it has some hyperparameters that define the density, and based on these hyperparameters, we actually indirectly obtain a different number of clusters depending on how we set the parameters. So first, let's set the terminology. So we have the set of data points x. We define a sigma neighborhood of a point P as the set of points within the area of radius sigma. So sigma is the radius of this neighborhood. So imagine that this we will provide some figures in a two-dimensional space, but this extends to any dimensional space. So the neighborhood is really in a space of n dimensions. So here the neighborhood is a set of points that have the distance from P smaller than sigma. So this is the sigma neighborhood of the point P. And here the distance can be, for example, the Euclidean distance. This is the most commonly used, but we can also, of course, use other distance functions. Okay, so we defined the sigma neighborhood. Now we have another definition of what it means to have a core point. So a core point is a point that has at least m points in its neighborhood. So if we have m points, including itself, in the neighborhood, then we say that the point P is a core point. If the point Q is in the gamma neighborhood of a core point, but it is not the point that is in the middle of the neighborhood, then this point is called a border point. And all the other points that are neither core points nor border points are called noise points. So in the end, when we will build our clusters, we will have some clusters that so actually here the clusters will contain core points or border points, and the noise points will not be allocated to any cluster, or they can be allocated to a default cluster. Okay, so yeah, just to illustrate the terminology visually, so we have a core point here for m equals 6. So this point has 6 points in its neighborhood, including itself. So the neighborhood here is sigma. So sigma is this distance here. So this is a core point. So all the other points are border points. So of course, if we can have more than one core points, but here we have only this point that is a core point, given these two constraints, this neighborhood and the number of neighborhood points 6. Okay, so all these points that are in this neighborhood of this point are border points, and these points that are they're not inside the neighborhood of a core point are noise points. Okay, so now we extend further the definition. So we also look at how these points are connected together. Okay, so we say that a point Q is directly density reachable from a point P if P is a core point and Q is in the sigma neighborhood of P. So as in the previous example, the points that are in the neighborhood of these points, these are directly density reachable. Okay, so it means that the points in the neighborhood of these points are directly density reachable. Okay, so this means that we can go directly to these points. We also have the concept of density reachable for a point Q. So a point Q is density reachable from a point P if there is a chain of points from P1 to Pn such that, okay, the first point in the chain P1 is equal to P and the last one is equal to Q, and all the intermediate points are directly densely connected, all the intermediate consecutive points. Okay, so P I plus 1 is directly density reachable from Pi, and this is for all I. Okay, so 2 points P and Q are density connected if there is a point, so this is another definition, if there is a point R such that both points P and Q are density reachable from R. Okay, so this is a loose, even looser definition. So here we have density reachable. So here we have this constraint that all the intermediate points are directly density reachable. So if we have a point, so this means that the points also have to be in the gamma neighborhood of a core point. Okay, so but we can also have this property if for example, if R is a border point and not necessarily a core point. So here we have the concept of density connected. Okay, so now with these definitions, in DBScan, a cluster is defined as a set of points that satisfies the following condition. First, the maximality, which means that for any 2 points from the data set, if the point P is included in the cluster, then all the points Q that are density reachable from P should be included also in the cluster. So all the points in a cluster are density reachable from one another. Then we have the connectivity. So if 2 points are in the same cluster, then P and Q are density connected. Okay, and the cluster will contain both core and border points. So this is not a constraint, this is just an observation. So with these 2 constraints, the maximality and connectivity, it means that the cluster will contain both core and border points. Okay, so referring to this terminology that we defined earlier, so I'm trying to go slowly over this because maybe the terminology seems simple if you go over it several times, as I did, but perhaps maybe for you it's not that obvious. Okay, so yeah, in this image we have these core point, sorry, these core points are the yellow ones, so these are core points, and here M is 6, and I think, yeah, so yeah, but this is also, yeah, this is also a core point. So yeah, maybe the example is not well designed here. So this would be if this is a border point here for these 2 points. So these are P and R are directly density connected, R and Q are directly density connected, and P and Q are directly density reachable, and P and Q are density connected through R. Okay, so yeah, this is the example where P and Q are density connected. And here, yeah, let's assume that R is not a core point. So although it has more points in the neighborhoods, which should be a core point, if we assume that R is not a core point, it's still this is still a single cluster. Okay, so yeah, the core points are these, the border points are these, and these belong to the cluster, and all the other points are noise, or actually these points can belong to other clusters if there are other points here. Okay, so for this example we used m equals 6, so in practice we will see that these parameters are not so easy to tune, so are very sensitive. The approach is very sensitive to these two parameters, but there is some way to fix them. Okay, so the algorithm in Python in pseudocode would look something like this. So for every point in the dataset X, we initialize the cluster assignment with -1. Then we go through the points, so we check if the point P is a core point. If it is a core point, then we set the cluster assignment with a new ID. For every point Q in the data set, if Q is density reachable from P and P is different from Q, then we set the same cluster assignment for Q. And yeah, after this for, so after we went through the entire data set here, X, we can increment the cluster index and go to the next point in the data set. Okay, so this is a simple algorithm, but is not optimal because it goes several times over. So once, for example, if it finds here a cluster, a point Q that was already assigned to a cluster, it will reassign it. Well, the cluster will be the same, but it will redo here the computations that will use the same higher cluster ID, but the cluster will be the same. So actually the algorithm, if we want to avoid these computations, is slightly more complex, and we have to remember if a point was previously processed or not. So yeah, the algorithm is actually slightly more complex than that, but it's still not so complicated. So here, yeah, we assume we have some structure for P, so it has a label that can be assigned. So if the point was not previously processed, so the labels are none. If the points were not processed, then we process the point. We determine all the points that are neighbors with P. So this is the sigma neighborhood. So we go through these points. We check that these points, so the number of points is higher than m. If not, then we label this point as a noise point, and we continue with the algorithm. If we reach this point, we increment the cluster index. We assign P to this cluster index, the current cluster index C. We remove the current point P from the set of neighbors, and then we pass through the set of neighbors. So for Q and S, we check that Q is a label point or not, and if it is a noise point, then we transform it into a border point. So we assign the cluster C here. If the point here had another label, it means that it is already assigned to a different cluster, or it should remain a noise point. And then we assign to this neighborhood point the label C, and we look for the neighbors of this point, and we add them to the set S. Okay, so then the S is updated online, and it can increase here the set of points. Of course, we assume that the points that were already included in S cannot be added again, so this is a reunion operation. Okay, so this is basically how the algorithm works. Of course, you have it implemented in scikit-learn. So if you apply dbscan on these clusters, so if you recall from last time, the k-means algorithm didn't produce the expected clusters for these examples, but here dbscan is able to cluster them as we expect. We see here some noise points that are farther away from the main cluster of points, and also here, but the main shape of the clusters is what we would expect. The interesting thing is that we do not need to specify the number of clusters, as I mentioned earlier. The distance metric that we use can also be considered as a hyperparameter. Here we just showed these results without discussing about the hyperparameter tuning process. So in order to obtain this result here, what would be the optimal sigma for the neighborhood, and what is the number of data points for the neighborhood. So dbscan is very sensitive to these two hyperparameters, and we have a heuristic for choosing the two hyperparameters. So first we just we just use a number k, let's say around 3, 4, or 5. So it really doesn't matter what we set here, and for each point pi, we compute the distance to its kth nearest neighbor. Okay, so k here is from the index of the nearest neighbor that is used to compute this distance. So we take every point pi, we look at the nearest neighbors, we take the kth one, so if k is 4, it means we look at the 4th nearest neighbor, and we compute the distance to the 4th nearest neighbor. Okay, then we sort the points by this distance in ascending order, and we obtain a curve something like this. So here we see that for k equal 3, k equal 4, and k equal 5, the curve looks roughly the same. So this is why I mentioned here that when we choose this number k, it doesn't really matter if it's 3, 4, or 5. It's about the same curve that we obtain, with perhaps some noise variation. Okay, so then what we do, so after we sort the points and obtain this graph, so once again, this is the point index, and this is the distance to the kth nearest neighbor. So these are the data points, and this is the distance to the kth nearest neighbor. So if we sort them by distance, the distance will gradually increase, and we obtain this curve, right? Okay, so now what we do is we analyze this curve and find the point with the largest change in slope, and we set sigma to the distance of I and k that corresponds to this point here. So we find the point with the highest change in slope, and we take the delta I of k corresponding to it, and we set this number as sigma. Okay, and then we set m equal k. So it is important to recall that the k that we start with is going to be the value m, and for a certain m, actually, so what we do here is we fix m, and then we choose an appropriate sigma for the respective m. Okay, so this means that all the points under this threshold will be core points, and yeah, this approach works well if the density of the data set is about the same in all the locations of the space. If the density varies from one cluster to another by too much, this approach will not work very well. Okay, so what happens if we set sigma to a lower value? We will obtain more clusters, and if so, lower sigma produces more clusters, and we set sigma to a higher value, we will obtain less clusters, so all the points will be added to a single cluster. So it means if we use a radius that is too big, yeah, the points will tend to be clustered in less clusters. If the radius is too small, we will obtain a lot of smaller clusters. Okay, so yeah, in summary, so this concludes the presentation of dbScan. So dbScan is a density-based algorithm which groups the data points that are closely packed together and marks all the other points as outliers. So these points are in low density regions. Yeah, so a cluster group of points is defined as a set of points that are density connected to each other. So this means that there is a chain of core points between any pair of points. Okay, and different from k-means, we do not need to know the number of clusters. The algorithm can find an arbitrary shapes of clusters. So as we saw in the previous slides, the clusters can have arbitrary shapes and non-convex shapes, actually. Okay, it also doesn't, as I mentioned, yeah, it doesn't require the number of clusters, but we have to carefully tune these two hyperparameters, sigma, the neighborhood, and m, the minimum number of points to be considered in the neighborhood. Okay, so yeah, other than being very careful how to tune these parameters, the algorithm is pretty straightforward to use. So next we move to clustering by unmasking. So this is a pretty recent algorithm that we introduced in 2019 in a paper published in the International Conference on Image Processing. So it was applied on clustering images. So it is a fairly simple algorithm. So it can provide a robust baseline. So yeah, we compared with k-means and other algorithms, and it seems to provide good results. So this is an agglomerative clustering algorithm. So essentially, it can produce a dendrogram, a tree of clusters. But we used it as a partitioning algorithm. So the algorithm is based on unmasking. So this is a technique that was previously used for authorship verification of text documents. So this approach was introduced in another previous paper published in the Journal of Machine Learning Research. So here, initially the approach was proposed, as I said, for authorship verification. So the idea, we have a text with unknown author, and we want to know who wrote this document. And we have a database of documents. I don't know, this could be novels, could be, I don't know, any type of documents. So here we just assume these are versions of the Bible, and let's say we have a new version of the Bible that is discovered, and we want to know if this was actually written by one of the main authors of the New Testament. So we have to compare this document with all the others, and to find the one that matches them. And yeah, well, you cannot apply a classical supervised approach, because you have only one document per per class, let's say. Okay, so this is the authorship verification framework, in which we have only one example per author, and you need to find if this text was written by one of these four. Okay, so the idea proposed in the unmasking paper was to take these documents, split them into chunks or sentences, and each of these chunks or sentences will represent our data samples. Then we use some representation to embed the data samples. So for example, we can represent them as a bag of words, or I don't know, TF, IDF, and so on. So there are some let's say standard representations that you can use, or whatever you choose. And once you get these data samples, what we do here is we suppose that, so each of these documents, let's say now we refer to this document and John. So both of them are split into sentences. Each sentence is a data sample, and we label them. So these belong to one class, and these will belong to another class. So we suppose that they are from different classes. So the assumption is that the documents are written by different people, and then we apply unmasking and see if this is actually true or not. So this is how the algorithm works. Okay, so yeah, what we do is we iteratively remove the best features from these sentences of the two documents, and as the as we remove the features, the accuracy will degrade over time. And here the observation is that in general, so here we have this curve that represents the accuracy degradation over time. And if this document is written by Mark, we will see that the respective curve will drop faster than the other ones. What does this mean? It means that when we start removing discriminative features, it will be harder and harder from the machine learning model that we use for the discrimination task to actually say that this sample belongs to this document and this sample belongs to this other document. So if these documents are written by the same person, it will be harder to tell them apart. If they are written from different persons, even if you remove discriminative features, you will still be able to say that these are really different. So the idea is that when you start with a lot of features, the machine learning model, so at the beginning, the machine learning model will be able to tell the model apart. So the algorithm looks something like this. So you have your data samples, some that have label +1 and some that are labeled -1. You have the features, the representation. You train some model, like some linear model on top of this, for example, an SVM. The linear model has some weights that are assigned to these features. You now determine what are the most discriminative features. So first you want to eliminate the most discriminative features. So let's say at first that now these features are about the content. So there is one feature that talks about I don't know I don't know, it's a word. So let's say, yeah, a document is a police novel and the other one is science fiction. So let's say here we have the feature, I don't know, policeman, and this is seen often in these data samples and not so often in the science fiction novel, okay? Whereas here we also have a different feature with, let's say this one is spaceship, so here we see spaceships and police, okay? But if these two novels, so in the beginning we will be able to discriminate them because they talk about different things, even if they are written about the same author. So if you eliminate these features like policeman and spaceship, then you will have the remaining features. You retrain a linear model and you will find another set of discriminative features. And you remove this and you continue the process until you build this curve, accuracy curve, for these pair of documents. So here we have two documents, right? One that is formed of examples x1 and x2, and the other that is formed of examples x3 and x4. And as you eliminate these features that are related to the topic of the model, you will reach features that are related to the author. So some specific writing patterns, let's say, or preference of some word choices. So when you reach these features and you eliminate the features about the content, it will be hard to discriminate between these two novels. So yeah, if the accuracy drops faster, it means that the model has a harder time of discriminating between the two, and they should be assigned to the respective author. The document should be assigned to the respective author. Okay, so going back to this slide, so here we build this curve in the same way for every author in the database. and then we assign the document to the author that has the curve with the steepest descent. Okay, so this is how we identify the author. So we use this machine learning model in order to build this curve, but in the end, in the authorship verification task, we just analyze these curves and say, okay, this curves is the one with the lowest accuracies, and we will assign the document to Mark. So yeah, in the end, you do not use the machine learning model to discriminate, let's say, between this document and the others. You just use it to generate this curve, and then you make the decision later. So actually this approach, these labels are just assumptions that we test out. So it's like a hypothesis. We hypothesize that these belong to different classes, and we use unmasking to test this hypothesis and find in the end if it's true or not. Okay, so this is the idea of the algorithm, and now we use this this algorithm in the same way, but we apply it in order to determine if two clusters should be joined or not. So this is an agglomerative clustering technique. So you start either with individual data samples, or you start with some pre-clustering into a lot of clusters. So we tried both types of approaches, and then you apply unmasking, and you try to determine if every pair of clusters should be joined or not. So we test out this hypothesis, these two independent clusters should be joined or not. We apply unmasking, and then we combine the clusters with the highest likelihood until we reach the number of clusters lower k that we want to obtain. Okay, so for this algorithm, we have the parameters is the number of training data samples, the number of clusters that we want to obtain. And we also have the parameters for unmasking. So we have to set the number of unmasking iterations and the number of features that we remove at each iteration. So luckily the algorithm is not very sensitive to these two parameters. So in the end, for example, we use the same parameters across all the experiments on different data sets and with different representations, and the algorithm works fine. So it's not that sensitive. Okay, so yeah, as I mentioned, we start with a number of cluster capital K. So it can be K can be equal to the number of data points, or we can use pre-clustering, let's say with K-means, then apply clustering by unmasking. And why is this? Why is the pre-clustering necessary? Because the algorithm is a bit computationally intensive, because it has to test this hypothesis between every pair of clusters. So you can do a fast pre-clustering with k-means or other technique, and then you can apply this to finalize the clustering. Okay, so yeah, for the algorithm looks something like this. So now we know what unmasking does. So for each pair of clusters I and j, we assume, so this is the hypothesis that we test, we assume that the samples in cluster I belong to a different class than the samples in cluster J. So as previously, we assumed that a document was written by an author and the other was written by a different author. So these are the assumptions. And then we compute a score that is based on the curve computed through the unmasking procedure. So the score reflects the probability of the statement clusters I and j should be joined or not. Okay, so in order to test this, we randomly split the samples in each cluster into a training and test set. So we train the model on training, and we apply it on the test samples. So here previously we had the documents that we had to split. Now we just already have some samples in the cluster, so there is no splitting or feature extraction. So we already have the features for all the data samples. We just need to apply the unmasking procedure. So first we randomly split the examples. We train an SVM and evaluate it on a test set, and we retain the accuracy. Then we sort the weights and remove the features that correspond to the highest weights, and we repeat these steps for n iterations. So n is the number of unmasking iterations, and we will show in the experiments that if we set n equal 1, the results are quite bad, even worse than k-means. So it's really important to do more iterations in order to obtain good results. Okay, so then we merge each cluster A with the cluster G using a greedy approach. So once, if we find two clusters that are below, actually here I think we use this. So we compute, the scores of matching every pair of clusters at the current step, and then we join. So we make we join the clusters with the maximum score, and then we look at the next score and join the clusters, and so on. And once we finish this step, we can check if the number of clusters that we have. So at any point actually during step 6, if we reach the number of steps k, then we stop the merging process and halt the execution. Otherwise, we can return to reapplying unmasking one more time if necessary. Okay, so once we form a new cluster, we need to compute the merging scores for the newly formed clusters with respect to the other clusters. So this is how the algorithm works. First, we have some results on the MNIST database, and here we have 10 classes, so random chance baseline is around 10%. And we consider also a supervised approach for this. Of course, if you go for deeper models, deeper neural networks, you will obtain an accuracy of around 99% here. So then the other baselines are clustering algorithms that are unsupervised. So this is the k-means baseline. So if you just take the MNIST database, so this is recall that this is applied on raw pixel data. So I think this is why we use the SVM baseline, because the SVM is also applied on raw pixel data. So if you apply k-means on the MNIST database, you can and you match the obtained groups with the actual classes, you can obtain an accuracy of around 56%. This is an approach from the literature that obtains around 71%. So if you apply unmasking with only one iteration, your accuracy will be 72%. And if you apply unmasking with, I think, 10 iterations, I think in the paper we propose to use 10 iterations. So in this case, you will obtain an accuracy that is around 81%. So this is an accuracy that is obtained by a model that does not use any labels during training. Okay, and I shown this picture on the first slide, so it was taken from the paper. It is a visualization of the groups formed by this approach, clustering by unmasking, on the MNIST database. And here we see the groups generated by the approach, and also the ground truth labels. Okay, so on the we also have results on two other image data sets, one with textures and one with flowers. So here we have around 25, so this one has 25 classes, so the random chance accuracy will be around 4%, and this one I think has around maybe 20 classes or something like that, or 17 classes, I don't remember exactly. Okay, so here we have also the SVM baseline, but this time working with raw pixel data will give very poor results, so we need some representation even for the SVM. So we try three different representations. The first one is a VGG model that is pre-trained on ImageNet. So since this approach is pre-trained with supervision, then the approach that we test here, even if it is unsupervised, it's maybe more regarded as an unsupervised transfer learning approach. Okay, so yeah, the representation is supervised, but the final decision is based on an unsupervised model. This is a bag of visual words approach, which is unsupervised. So here the complete approach is unsupervised, and this is an AlexNet architecture that is actually trained without supervision on ImageNet. So it is mainly designed to provide the approach was proposed as a pre-training approach for CNNs. So we just use this unsupervised pre-training for the AlexNet architecture and use the representation on these two datasets. So the pre-training of this unsupervised architecture and even the pre-training of this supervised one has no relation to these two databases. So we opted for some databases that do not contain any objects in common with ImageNet to avoid any cheating of the algorithm. And here we see some results for the SVM. So these are again what is probably the maximum or the desired accuracy that we might want to achieve here with the unsupervised approaches. And in this case you see that if you use unmasking with only one iteration, the results are worse than k-means. And yeah, this happens for this representation. For this representation it seems that accuracy is better for UIC Tech, but lower for Oxford Flowers. And once again here it is maybe similar on UIC Tech and lower for Oxford Flowers. And if you use unmasking for so the complete process, you will get higher accuracy rates compared to k-means. So yeah, these are quite difficult settings. So in previous approaches for clustering in the literature, they were mainly employed on k-means, and then didn't test them out on more difficult benchmarks. And yeah, here the results are quite satisfactory for us. So yeah, given the random chance baseline, these are quite good results, given that the approaches do not use any labels. Okay, so yeah, now we're also going to discuss about some classic hierarchical clustering approaches. So and here the goal is actually to build a hierarchy of clusters. So usually a cluster, so in this hierarchy it means that the cluster is composed of smaller clusters, and there are two strategies for building the hierarchy, as I explained earlier. So unmasking, the clustering by unmasking can fall in this category. So it is a agglomerative approach. So in this approach we start with individual points and try to join them together. And we also have the top-down approach, in which we start with a single cluster and try to divide the cluster into smaller and smaller clusters. So either way we obtain a hierarchy of clusters. And from these two, in practice, the most used one is the agglomerative technique. And in the classical implementation it works something like this. So perhaps I should mention here that in the classical implementation, the classical approach works well with only a few data points, maybe like at most 100 or maybe 100 and something. If you use this hierarchical clustering approach on too many data sample, you will not obtain representative results. Our approach, clustering by unmasking, is an exception, but is based on it's maybe specifically designed for databases with a lot of data samples, which makes the testing of the hypothesis with unmasking easier. Okay, so how the classic algorithm works. So we have the independent points. Each starts with its own cluster. So we look at the closest points. Let's say these are F and G, so these are the closest 2 points, so we put them in the same cluster. And then we continue, we find again the clusters that are closest together. These are of points A and B, they are clustered, so they are put in the same cluster. Then these two are very close to C, so we form here another cluster of 3 points. But notice here that we keep this hierarchical structure. So first we clustered A and B, and then we clustered them with C. We go on, we find another cluster of representative points. This is D and E. So here we also, in building this hierarchy, we also look at the distance between the 2 points that were clustered here. So here the distance, as we construct now the clusters, these are farther and farther away from each other. So at this point, this cluster seems to be closer to F and G. So first we generate this cluster here, and finally, so the algorithm goes on until all the data points are added to a single cluster. So we obtain this result here. So yeah, the tree is called dendrogram. So now once we have this dendrogram, we can try to cut the tree at different levels. The branches represent different groups, and we can make different interpretations with respect to these branches. So we can cut them here and find some maybe more global and generic clusters. If we cut them closer to the leaves, we will find more clusters that are smaller and perhaps more specific. Okay, so the algorithm in pseudocode looks something like this. So we have a function that is applied. Yeah, perhaps here I should add, like, this tries to be some sort of Python code. So let's add the points here. Okay, so yeah, so first we start with a clustering assignment such that each point is in its own cluster. Here we also have the steps to recreate the dendrogram, so the steps, the matching that were done. And the algorithm continues in a loop until we reach a single cluster. So we try to find the pair of clusters I and j with the minimum distance. We eliminate these individual clusters from our assignment, and we add to our assignment the group, the clusters that are joined together. Okay, and here we append to our log, to our steps variable, we append the update I and j. Okay, so here we didn't mention so how we determine how far these clusters are from one another. So here actually this distance between clusters is based on a linkage criterion, and we have different options. So first one is to use the distance between two clusters Ci and Cj is equal to the minimum between the distance from all the possible pair of data points where x is taken from one cluster and y is taken from the other cluster. So in this case it will be the distance from these two data points. Then we have complete linkage, which takes the maximum distance. So we have these two clusters, we take all the possible distances as before and we keep the maximum one. So it might be the distance between these 2 points, and this is the criterion that we use to match clusters. Then we also have the average linkage, which takes the average of all the possible distances, and the centroid linkage, which is less computationally intensive than this one. So we just compute the centroids of the two clusters, and then we compute the distance between the centroids. And as distance metric between data points, we can use any distance metric. So this is perhaps really important aspect in hierarchical clustering. Of course, not all distance metrics have centroids, so in some cases, on some data representations, this approach is not available, so we only have these 3 options. So it depends on the distance function. Okay, and there is also the words criterion, which works in conjunction with the Euclidean distance. So we link the clusters with the smallest increase in variance. So here we have the variance for the joint cluster, the variance for the 2 clusters, and the criterion, or the distance to match the clusters, is computed as the variance of the joint cluster minus the variance of the individual clusters. So as these distance if we increase the variance by the smallest amount, then we want to join these two clusters together. Otherwise, we can keep them apart. Okay, so these linkage criteria have different properties. So for example, single linkage tends to produce long chain-like clusters. The distance between the two farthest elements in a cluster can be very large, and it can handle non-convex clusters, but it is sensitive to noise. For complete linkage, it tends to keep the points in the cluster close together. So because it matches based on the smallest maximum distance, it tends to produce spherical and compact clusters, and is less sensitive to noise than single linkage. Average linkage is a compromise between the two, as you perhaps noticed, and it produces results more similar to complete linkage. And the words approach is kind of similar to complete linkage, but is more sensitive. Perhaps even less sensitive to noise, and it's able to handle clusters with various densities as single linkage. So it kind of has some advantages of single linkage and complete linkage, but is closer to complete linkage. Okay, so if we look at these two types of data sets, so we have this data set and this data set with these two non-convex clusters here, and these clusters with different densities. So if you apply a single linkage, you see that it is sensitive to the noise. For complete linkage, you see that the clusters are better in this case. So single linkage works well in this case, and here when we have some density variations between clusters, it doesn't work so well. Complete linkage is able to cope better with the density variation. Average linkage is in this case closer to single linkage, and word is able to produce the best results in this case, but so in this case is somewhat similar to complete or average linkage, while single was better here. So depends on the data that you have. You can try different approaches and see which one works better. Okay, and we also have a case study with clustering DNA sequences with local rank distance. So you can actually build phylogenetic trees using mitochondrial DNA, but if you want to use this data, you need some specific distance for sequences, for strings, and this application was proposed in a paper in which I introduced this distance called local rank distance. So it is based on an extension of an approach that was previously proposed by some colleagues from the University of Bucharest. So the main idea for rank distance, it was proposed as an alternative to Hamming distance or edit distance to produce faster results than edit distance, and perhaps better results than Hamming distance. And it works something as the following. So here we have an example with two strings from a binary alphabet with A and B, and the characters. So in order to compute rank distance, first we annotate the characters with indexes from left to right. So here the first occurrence of A is index 1, the second occurrence is 2, and so on. So then once you do this indexation, you just try to compute the distance between the positions of the characters in the two strings. So here A1 appears on the first position and here on the second position. So we have the absolute difference between the two positions, 1 minus 2. Then we have the distance between the positions of B1 and B1 here. So we have 2 minus 1. Then we have A2 here. So for A2, here we had the rank distance had this problem that if character is not present in the other string, so in this case A2, we just add the maximum possible distance between two characters. So this will be the distance between position 1 and 4. So in this case we add a 3. Then we have distance between B2, and then we have also another missing character, B3, so we add the maximum distance. Okay, so you see that the distance is not perfect, so if you add this required indexation, you might not be able to match some characters, which doesn't seem quite right. So I think in this case, maybe this B2, since it's in the same position and it's also B in the original string, perhaps here we should consider the distance 0. So it's not really maybe not the most natural way to compute a distance between strings. So local rank distance tries to solve this problem by not annotating the characters, so we do not add this indexation to the characters, and you just try to match what we have, the characters directly. The problem, if you try to match them directly, if you look just at individual characters, you might match them randomly in the string. So we also do not want this. So in order to make sure that we match characters with some consistency, we use n-grams of characters. Okay, so the idea here, so for example, if we use 3 grams, so here we eliminated the indexation, right? So for example, in rank distance, so if you consider the indexation, these 3 letters will be matched. So this G will be matched here, the T, this is T1 and T1 matched here, and this is A3 that will be matched here. But actually we find that this subsequence appears exactly in a very close location in the string, about here. So in local rank distance we do not have any indexation, and for each n-gram we try to find the closest n-gram in the other string that matches it, and we just add the difference between these two positions. So yeah, it tries to recover this by matching character n-grams, and we have an efficient algorithm for this approach that works in n log n time. So actually the time is proportional to the length of the strings. So the algorithm works something like this. So we have 2 strings S and T, and to compute the distance between them, we take the string T and store all the n-gram positions in a hash, So this is an inverted index table, and where we have the n-grams as the key, and the locations, the positions as the values. So for each n-gram we have a sorted array of positions. So the array of positions is already sorted if we process the string from left to right, and we just add positions in the sorted array. So then once we build this hash, we take the other string. So we take every n-gram from a string s, we look it up in the inverted index table. If we find it there, then we do a binary search. The lookup in the inverted index table is 1. The binary search is log n. And okay, so you look it up in this positional array to find the nearest position of x in t. So once you find this position, you just add it to the distance. So this actually gives you the distance from s and t. But if you use this algorithm, the distance is not symmetric. You also have to take all the n-grams from the other string and repeat the process in the other way around. So you have essentially, so if you have a function that has these steps, you have to call it once with the parameters s and t, and then again with the parameters t and s. So here is a practical example of this algorithm. So you have the two strings s and t here, again from a binary alphabet for simplicity. Of course, when you use DNA, you have a 4-letter alphabet, but here we just use this 2-letter alphabet as an example. So let's assume that we want to use 3 grams. So the first step is to build the hash table of 3 grams from t. So the hash table looks something like this. So we have the n-gram BAB that appears twice in location 1 and 4, ABB in location 2, BBA in location 3, and ABA in location 5. Then you take 3 grams from S, so we go to step 2 now. So the first n-gram is ABA. We look it up in the hash table, we find it here. It seems to be in only one location, so we just add the difference 1 minus 5 to the distance. Then we move to the next n-gram in S. This is BAB. We look it up in the hash table, we find here positions 1 and 4, and we apply a binary search to find the closest position to 2. So in this case the position is 1, so we add 2 minus 1 to the distance. And yeah, this is basically the algorithm. And now so yeah, I tried to present intuitively that if you use n-grams, you get better clusters. So yeah, if you apply the algorithm using 2 grams of characters, and as I said, the hierarchical clustering algorithm are typically applied on a few examples to be able to interpret the results. So I think this cluster is representative. These should be clustered together. This is also a representative clustering. I think maybe here we have some mistake with I think with maybe the cow. No, I think this goes well in this cluster. There is a mistake with the human that should be placed, I think, in this cluster here. So if you increase the length of n-grams, you will get better and better clusters. So I think, yeah, I think if you use 8 letters, this is already a good cluster. So yeah, These should be clustered something like this. So yeah, I think okay, so now I noticed a mistake from this part. So we have sheep somewhere here. I don't see it. Sheep. Okay, so the sheep here is put in the cluster with the monkey species. And this is wrong. It should be put together with cow and whales. So yeah, I think so. Here this is still a mistake. The sheep is still somewhere here. It's not clustered correctly. And for cluster 8, I think, yeah, I think this clustering is good. For 10 grams, it is also good. And if you want actually to obtain more robust results, you can sum the distances for all the possible n grams and apply the clustering on top of that. Okay, so yeah, I think this is maybe the final slide from this case study. So yeah, it can have other applications as well. So another example, and just working on a paper, and what we tried here in this paper, I'm not sure how clear you can see it. So what we tried here is to cluster scientific papers from a certain domain or sub area of machine learning. And we observed that after clustering, so once again here we have I think a little more than 100 documents clustered, and well, there are some papers that are not really representative for these clusters, but most of them, so here all these are based on self-paced learning. These are reinforcement learning approaches. These refer to domain adaptation. We have speech processing here, image and text classification. Here we have detection, segmentation, and yeah, on natural images and also in the medical domain. So we see some clusters that we can interpret nicely here. Okay, so this leads me to an observation with respect to the projects for the unsupervised approaches. So it is expected from us that you also interpret your results. So just applying a method and say showing an image with okay, these are the cluster that I obtained, it doesn't mean anything. You also have to interpret the results to extract some meaningful information. So you need to explain, okay, this cluster represents this and that, and this other cluster represents this and that, and so on. So you need to interpret your results. Perhaps it is also useful to, I mean, I think not useful, it is maybe mandatory to, yeah, I think it is a good rule. So we would like to see a comparison also with the random chance baseline, and also a comparison with a supervised approach. So this might also be helpful for you to give you an idea of how well the clustering works, something of the sort of what we did here with let me go back to clustering by unmasking. Yeah, so if you look at these slides, so we have here the random chance baseline, a supervised approach, and then my clustering approaches. So of course you do not have to propose a new approach, but you can compare two clustering approaches and see how they compare to each other, and how they compare to the random chance baseline and the SVM in terms of accuracy. So this also gives you an interpretation of the results. Okay, so let me now just skip to, I think this is the last slide, the summary. So yeah, this is the summary with respect to hierarchical clustering. So yeah, we discussed mostly about agglomerative clustering that produces a dendrogram of clusters. As you saw, it works by starting with individual points in their own clusters and then iteratively selecting two clusters to join. We have the linkage criterion, the way we compute the distance between clusters that can be defined in different ways, like a single linkage, complete linkage, average linkage, and centroid linkage, and wards linkage. The selected distance metric between points and the linkage criterion have an impact on the shapes and sizes of the produced clusters, so this is important. And yeah, this was the final slide. So let me go back to the presentation here and see if there are any questions. So yeah, until you write down your questions, I'm going to make some statements about the grading system. So I just want to recall. So yeah, as you remember maybe from the first slide, that the first project, so the Kaggle competition, accounts for 60%, and the other part accounts for 40%. So it means that whoever did not participate in the Kaggle competition will not be able to pass the exam by just doing the second project, so that's not possible. When you choose your data sets, so there is no overlap allowed, so you have to communicate the data sets and methods to the supervisors, so they write them down in a document to make sure that there are no matches. So I established as deadlines for proposing the data set and the methods through 9th of January, including 9th of January. So until Saturday night you have to choose your data set, but maybe you have to think about it earlier, not to submit it in the very last moment, because your proposal might be rejected at first. So you need to submit it earlier and make sure it gets accepted before 9th of January, okay? So it's not sufficient to submit it at 9th of January at 11 p.m. Because it might get rejected, so it's not okay to do that. So make sure that you submit it in advance. You have to submit, so I think you already submitted the first project until 5th of January. Yeah, the submission was a bit of a mess because it wasn't clear where to submit the projects. So right now we have to gather the projects from the lab assistants or those that are submitted to the official address. So anyway, the second project, please submit them to the address practical.ml.fmi at google.com. So let me try to see if I have it here, but I think you got it. Practical ML, yeah, that's the address. So you have to submit there, okay, until 20th of January. So the second project has to be submitted until 20th of January. So after this date, so I need some time, perhaps 2 or 3 days to analyze the projects and check for plagiarism. And perhaps starting from the 24th and on, we will set a date for the exam, and on that date you will present both your projects. So it will be a single day for the presentation, and you will present, we will define a schedule for the presentations, and each person will have to present the submitted projects during that time. So I'll probably allocate maybe 15 minutes or 20 minutes per students. There are a lot of students. We will try to finish this in one day, and we have 3 people that can watch the presentations. So even if we have 3 presentations in parallel, it will probably take 6 to 8 hours maybe to see all the projects. Okay, so the date of the presentation will be established later. So far, I think so for the bachelor program, we got an email to communicate the dates of the exams. For the masters, we didn't got that email yet. I'm not sure if they will do it and how soon. So once I get this email, I will try to set up a date and confirm it to you. So until then, I'm not sure if I can do this. Otherwise, we can also try to establish together a date at our convenience. Yeah, definitely after 24th of January. Okay, so yeah, if you have some preference for the dates of the exam, you can communicate them to me by email. Well, not everybody, you have to talk among yourselves, decide on a few options, and one representative can send them, can communicate them to me by email, and I will try to choose one of the dates. So starting with maybe 25th until the end of the exam period, we can set a date. I would prefer to be sooner than later, so maybe in this week from 25th to 31st of January would be perfect for me. And yeah, I think that's what I wanted to tell you. I hope I didn't miss anything. Okay, so in the meantime, we got only one question. So the question is related to how should we compare the predictions made by a supervised learning algorithm with the clustering given to us by an unsupervised learning algorithm. Using the accuracy. Okay, so maybe the question is how do you know the clusters labels, I think. So indeed, what you usually do and what we also did in this case here, you in order to, yeah, so in the end you get some clusters. You do not know what clusters, on how to match the clusters. So there are 2 approaches here. If you don't have so many classes in your data set, so if you have, I don't know, maybe at most 10 classes, what you can do is you can try to report the accuracy for the best possible match that you can find. So assume that we have these clusters, let's say this cluster here, right, that is mostly formed of 7s, but it also contains some 9s, it also contains some 8s, and so on. So we do not know that the majority is 7, right? So what we try to do is we say, okay, with let's say this cluster is 7 and this cluster is 1. And of course we also have an assignment for all the other clusters. And if with this assumption we compute the accuracy and see that maybe that accuracy is very low, then what we can do is try different assignments and find and report the accuracy for the most favorable assignment. So this is the way you can do it. Another approach could be a greedy approach, which is not, of course, not optimal. So if you just take only one cluster, try to find to see if most of the data belongs to which class, and so you just try to match it with any of the labels. Then you assign the label, you go to the next cluster, you assign it to the class that has the most that gives you the highest accuracy, and so on. So there is the greedy approach, and also there is the optimal solution and efficient solution that is based on the Hungarian algorithm. So yeah, this is the algorithm. Perhaps you learned it in bachelor school. I hope you did, in fact. So but yeah, even if you don't know how to implement it, you can still find open source implementations to compute the Hungarian algorithm. I mean open source libraries. Yeah, so this algorithm is a bipartite matching algorithm for bipartite graphs. So you have this set of points that are the actual labels, the set of points that are you have the classes and the clusters, and for each pair of class and cluster you have a score that is given by the accuracy. And so you have this bipartite graph, and then you try to apply the Hungarian algorithm on top of it in order to find the optimal matching with the costs that are given by the accuracy rates. So yeah, once you compute this matching, you are able to report your accuracy rate. And yeah, for unsupervised algorithm, besides the accuracy, you can also find metrics such as the normalized mutual index and so on. So other metrics that are specific to clustering approaches. But yeah, I think reporting the accuracy really gives you a better interpretation of the results. Yeah, so the data set, so there are two ways to do this. So first, either you start from a data set that is labeled, so you know what are the labels, you know what you're clustering. So let's say if you have images, of course these need to be labeled in order to be able to interpret the results and analyze your clusters. If you use a data set with tabular data, so let's say, I don't know, I have some data points that have different features. Let's say the data points are, I don't know, people, and they have, I don't know, maybe these are football players and they have different features like stamina, speed, and so on. So you can use one of the features as the label. Okay, so you take out that feature, you say, okay, these are the labels. I'm not going to use them in the training of the supervised approach or during clustering, so this is an independent feature, and I'm trying to cluster these data points on these football players and see then if the clusters are anywhere matching or correlated to this feature that I left out. So this can be an approach if your data set, so if you cannot use this feature as a label, then yeah, you have to use a labeled data set. So if you're using images, text, or audio, these have to be labeled. Yeah, there is no way you can use a feature as label. Okay, so the purpose of the project is just to compare and experiments. Is to compare two unsupervised approaches, and to analyze the results and do hyperparameter tuning, and so on. So yeah, and so you need to show that you can and you understand how to apply these approaches, and how to interpret their results. Okay, so you have to you have to compare two unsupervised approaches, and see which one obtains better results. But you also have to use baselines, such as the random chance baseline and a supervised model, as a baseline. Of course, you can also use baselines from the literature. So you can use, for example, if you find any papers with unsupervised techniques, so results from literature, then you can compare with those results, okay, and see, look, my approach is better than that, or close to that one. But I think you will not be able to find these results so easily in literature. So yeah, it's safer to just use as baseline a random chance and a supervised model as baselines. Okay, so these supervised models don't have to be built by yourself. They can also be taken from literature also, okay? So the random chance is just what happens if you assign a random class. So it's pretty easy to compute. And the supervised model, I assume you will find some results in some papers on the data set that you're using, so you can report those results as the supervised baseline. So you don't have to implement a supervised approach in order to, or try to fine-tune it or something. It's just a baseline, right? You just write down a number in the table, just as a reference for us. Yeah, so you have to do both. So you use two baselines, a random chance baseline and a supervised model as baseline. So if you ask again, the answer will be the same. Unsupervised transfer learning. You can try that too, of course. So if you report, maybe it's not the only approach that I would like to see, but if you say, okay, I'm also using this supervised representation and apply k-means on top of that, then it's nice. It's a better result. But I will also like to see the results of the pure approach, and then you can also use unsupervised transfer learning. So yeah, if you have more results to present with different features and so on, it is better. Okay, so yeah, we're about 10 minutes past the time, so just maybe wait 1 or 2 more minutes for questions, and otherwise we can close the session here. Okay, so I think I had another question that from one of the lab assistants. I'm not sure, maybe it was, but it's the same rule for both first year and second year master students. So for the bonus points, you have we have the bonus points here for the lecture, and I'm also going to add them for actually the lab assistants will add them for the lab. So for the lab and for the lectures, you can have a bonus of maximum 1 point for the lecture and 1 point for the labs. So in the end, your maximum bonus is 2 points. So here, this 2 I think is wrong. So it should be 1. Yeah, so the maximum bonus is 1 here. Or maybe not. I have to see. Maybe I think maybe these are already added up. I'm not sure. I have to discuss. I think, yeah, it seems to be more points that I remember, and perhaps they added them in the same column. Okay, so yeah, the main idea is that the maximum that you can get is 2 points. Okay, so yeah, let's go back here. Okay, there are no further questions, so thank you guys for participating, and see you next week with the last lecture from 6 p.m. Okay, thank you, and have a good night.